And we are back as the federal landscape grows increasingly hostile towards the transgender and gender non-binary individuals, particularly with recent executive orders from President Donald Trump targeting these communities. New York State stands as a beacon of hope. The state's leadership demonstrates a commitment to safeguarding the rights and well-being of trans New Yorkers, but with growing threats from far-right agendas, more is called on to be done. Joining me now is the Interim Executive Director of the New Pride Agenda. We've got Kei Williams, and thank you so much for being with us. I don't have him. I think I need to hear you, and I don't quite hear you, but we'll get that going, I think, in just a second. But let's talk for a second about this, because as we look at the president, a lot of work has been going on since he's taken office, particularly these executive orders. And looking at these executive orders and seeing what's happening, your response to them.
The executive orders that have been executed just in the past week, obviously for us reflect a larger dangerous agenda, right? They are designed to undermine LGBTQ rights, obviously TG and CV rights, but also the rights of many marginalized people who hold multiple identities. And so part of what we've been really trying to do is provide safety for awareness, education, and support, but respond accordingly. Unfortunately, these executive orders weren't surprising, and at the same time, they are increasingly overwhelming to us and other communities.
What about your constituents? I mean, hearing and seeing what's going on coming out of Washington, D.C., the reality actually now hitting. What's been the response and what's been the conversation within the community?
And there's a statewide organizing and advocacy organization. So we are based in New York State. That does not mean that we are not receiving the same calls of concern and considerations from our members. Obviously, people are concerned about having access to gender affirming care, having access to the programs and health services that they have been able to receive here in New York. But also, again, most LGBTQIA identifying people in New York live intersectional identities. So we're also having, these issues compound with folks who, for example, might also be migrant and trans, right? Might also be incarcerated and trans, but also the issues that are impacting our youth and impacting families that support those youth, right? And so part of how what we're hearing is not just these calls in terms of access to care, but also access to safety, access to just being able to live their lives on a day-to-day basis. And so it is a full-on attack for our community. And part of how we're responding as an advocacy organization is trying to ensure that our elected officials, our governor, and those who currently hold the legislature here in New York are willing to answer the calls to action to continue to protect their rights and provide direct resources to transgender individuals here in New York. And for us, that would be most actively calling on the governor to continue to hold strong to her call and what she has done in resourcing the Lorena Borjas Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, which has been a $4.25 billion fund that specifically funds trans serving and trans-led organizations in New York. And those organizations provide the care that is currently under attack by this incoming or current administration. And so for us, as an advocacy organization, we're mandating that the governor stand strong to those politics and stand strong to her principles of supporting the TGNC community. Outside of that, as a community-based organization providing direct services. So we have an empowerment center here in New York City. We also have a chapter in Western New York. And so we are also holding convening actual spaces for our community to gather in safe environments, be that, accessing our food pantry here, or accessing our support groups. So we're trying to do both things. On the advocacy front, it's really adjusting policy, and then on the community safety front, it's actually providing more programs and ensuring that community have safe spaces to gather.
Yeah. Let's talk about the executive orders and the constitutionality of what's really going on here. From your perspective, not just say from your perspective, but from the perspective of those who are in the community, talk to me a little bit about the constitutionality factor and what you feel is right and how you feel is, or I should say, what you feel is wrong, and how is it wrong?
think the primary executive orders, there's been many and they're rolling, right? So I think the first executive order was in the framing of defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. This executive order is very interesting. It's unconstitutional, but it's also something that we saw in Trump's first presidency, and it attempts to narrowly define gender as binary, that is determined at birth. But we know that gender and sex are two separate things, two separate subjects that actually don't actually belong together, right? And so this executive order tries to make gender synonymous with sex. And sex is such a like broad range, and I think that it actually causes more harm. And when you attempt to flatten an individual's reality and their identity to live outside of the gender binary, this includes not just transgender people or folks who might transition. This is also including folks who might be intersex, folks who whose traditional gender does not even as a sex fall within the default binary of female and male, right? And so the implications of narrow definitions is something that we actually saw in the first Trump presidency, but the expansion of it through an executive order, again, is being challenged in various ways in terms of the constitutionality of it. And we really find this to be a matter of pseudoscience, right? Science that is not based in what most world health practitioners actually believe in how we undertake the roles of sex and gender. It also seeks to halt the uses of gender X markers, which is something that takes place in terms of identifying or for one to be able to self-select their identification on their entry cards. But part of this is that this has already been challenged legally before, and it will continue to be challenged again. I think it was challenged in last challenged in the court case, a federal court case in May of 2020. Which the government, rightfully aligned with this individual, the holder's sex, in terms of what that person or how the person wanted to identify has already been taken under charge in this federal court case in 2022. And then again, it targets protections for incarcerated trans people. We already are seeing a lawsuit that has been brought forth by an incarcerated individual in Massachusetts who was trans identifying, and they're charging against this constitutionality against the 8th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. The cruel and unusual punishment that has already also been federally legislated before. And so all of these things that are rolling out are both ideologies, yes, executive orders that are primarily constructed to really serve a conservative far right, agenda that is much larger than just the LGBTQ community or the TGNC community. But unfortunately, we are caught in the primary crosshairs of most of these executive orders. But all of these executive orders are going to be constitutionally challenged, litigated, both for their cause and how they can actually be implemented. And I think that's the hardest part for a lot of our community members is understanding, especially in a state like New York or as New York residents, right? How does this actually impact our living experience? And so it is causing a lot of overwhelm, a lot of fear, but we have a lot of faith in our government. We have a lot of faith in our Attorney General. We have a lot of faith that here in New York, in the home of Stonewall, right, that these protections and the things that we have put forth, such as Proposition 1 here in New York State, will be able to kind of keep us as a safe haven and a stronghold. And these are the things, again, that I continue to think about here in the Pride Agenda in terms of that. Yes, we are an LGBTQ organization, but our members hold intersectional identities. And so the onslaught of offenses on all marginalized bodies and on many marginalized people is really concerning, but we're actually really prepared. And we feel like New York is prepared by launching, for example, the Empire State Freedom Initiative, which is a coordinating effort that has happened between our Attorney General and our governor to ensure that New York is ready to really deal with these kind of like rolling out executive orders that are really harmful and quite frankly pretty violent.
I want to get an opportunity to share a little bit about the Empire State Freedom Initiative, and that is one of the things that are actually in place to protect rights. So for people who are in New York, give us a little insight into the Empire State Freedom Initiative.
State Freedom Initiative was something that Governor Hochul came out with right away in partnership with the Attorney General Tish James' office. And this is really a joint effort between both the Attorney General and the executive branch, and being committed to defending against these unconstitutional actions through legal actions and legal challenges specifically. And this for us is really important because we know that, we live in a country where, yes, there is federal rights and yes, there are executive orders, but there are limitations to what executive orders can do in the construction of, federalism, which is how our government is structured. And so the states do have rights and the states do have protections. And our attorney general and our governor can challenge these executive orders and the impacts of them on the basis of constitutionality. We saw this very quickly with New York joining in on the challenge of the executive order for birthright citizenship. For us, we actually expect the same. And I think that we would call on our AG and our governor to respond rightfully on what these protections that we have in New York State and how the executive orders that are put forth against the LGBTQ community, the TGNC community, within that community, how the current executive orders are really, not in alignment with some of those things, right? For example, last November, voters in New York, over 4 million voters in New York, the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers voted to pass Proposition 1 or Proposal 1, which is New York's Equal Rights Amendment. That Equal Rights Amendment included in its protections enshrining anti-discrimination protections on gender identity and expression within the state constitution. So New Yorkers overwhelmingly support, right, having equity within human rights. And so what we're calling on when it comes to the Empire State Freedom Initiative, right, is not just undertaking coordinated efforts to protect things on the basis of citizenship, but to also challenge on the basis of the New York State Constitution where there might be issues and areas that kind of are anti what's happening in these executive orders. We feel very, very hopeful about that. I mean, that's why we worked on Proposition 1 last year. We worked on Proposition 1 because we were aware of the possibility of a Trump presidency. We were aware of what Project 2025 was setting forth to be kind of this onslaught, this 900-page document of supporting the far right conservative agenda, right? And we are a nonprofit organization, right? So when it comes to our politics, we are very neutral. But just as the fact of the matter is that the federal policy agenda and blueprint for restructuring our rights in this country is very concerning. And so we worked on Proposition 1 as a make sure to ensure that yes, we do have rights and protections in New York, but those rights and protections are now enshrined in our state constitution. And this kind of gives us a little bit more ground to kind of build our case and to challenge these executive orders.
Yeah. When we look at transgender communities, obviously a lot of work is being done to advocate, and advocacy is going on in I should say in the state, across Washington, D.C. as well. But how can those who are in the trans community be able to also join in this fight and join in making sure that their voice is being heard?
PNC community has been at the forefront of many movements, right? I think queer, trans, New Yorkers, queer and trans people have always been involved in social movements historically, right? So when it comes to being what trans New Yorkers should do or what queer and trans people should do, we have efforts that have happened. Folks have gone down to Washington, D.C. People joined the People's March that happened a couple of weeks ago. Gender Liberation March has been convening people for folks who want to be out in the streets, and that is their calling. For us at New Pride Agenda, part of what we are asking for is people to join us in calling on the governor to ensure that she passes the Lorena Borjas Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, that she expands it, and she continues to commit to that. And you can do that by, following our organization, by supporting our organization through membership, through volunteer opportunity. We are a statewide organization here in New York. And we are part of a coalition of various coalitions of various issue areas. And we are also part of national initiatives as well. And so New Pride Agenda is here to be an advocacy organization, but we can only do that work by having folks who are, yes, impacted, but also who are prepared to get involved in the advocacy and the policy work. And I think that that's really important for folks to understand that there is actually things that can be done. There is work that can be done, and there are ways that we can resist and that we can fight back. And that is by joining organizations like New Pride Agenda. That is by ensuring that your elected officials are responding accordingly to the federal hostility. And that is making sure that those responses are done by, making sure that we're ensuring the safety and wellness of all New Yorkers, LGBTQ people, TGNC folks, live. Yes, we have unique experiences, but we are impacted by the same things that all New Yorkers are impacted by. We are impacted by housing. We are impacted by unemployment. We are impacted by healthcare access. We are impacted by the same exact issues that all New Yorkers are impacted by. And that is what New Pride Agenda is work is about, is ensuring that we have an equitable stake in what takes place, right? And so Lorena Borjas, Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, is an attempt on our end and a commitment in ensuring that trans serving and trans-led organizations across the state get their fair share and being, resourced properly. And that's what we look forward to. And I think the last thing that I would, say specifically to the TGNC community outside of the political awareness is just know that New Pride Agenda as an advocacy organization that is made up of queer and trans people who share in that lived experience, that you are seen, right, as TGNC community members, that you are valued and that you are loved, right? And that part of what New Pride Agenda is here to do is to stand unwaveringly, in the fight for those rights and for that dignity and for that safety.
I gotta ask you to really talk about the Lorena Borges Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, because that is something that's out there, and I know that it's near and dear to those in the transgender community. For those who may not be so familiar, please give us a little bit about the fund and tell me about its efforts.
Borjas Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund was a fund that is named after a trans Latina elder, Lorena Borjas, who did a lot of community organizing, a lot of community work, who unfortunately we lost during the COVID pandemic. And this fund was initially drafted and put together as an opportunity to, again, provide equity within resourcing communities that identify and or serve transgender individuals. So it is a fund that supports trans serving or trans-led organizations across New York. New York is the home to the second largest state level fund in the country that's dedicated to trans health and wellness. And that is thanks to the work of New Pride Agenda and its allies, those who joined us in Albany in advocating for this fight. The late Cecilia Gentili was part of that fight and that effort as well. And what the Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund does, or TWEF, as we call it, is that it has in total provided over multiple year grants, $12 million to trans serving organizations specifically. And the reason why this was outlined from the state budget is that even though there is funding in our state budget that does go to the health and human services of LGBTQ organizations, a funding report of organizations, of nonprofit LGBT organizations, found out that only 4 cents of every dollar of dollars that are allotted to LGBTQ organizations, only 4 cents on the dollar actually makes it to trans serving or trans-led organizations. And so for us, that was the cause of saying we need specific money to provide a more equitable space and services for trans serving and trans-led organizations in New York. So this has resulted in currently standing a $4.25 million annual commitment in partnership with the executive branch in New York and the legislature in New York. And these services, provide trans-led, trans-servicing organizations to provide services such as gender-affirming care, housing, workshops, support of safety groups, and it's statewide. So it's from organizations that are based in New York City, that are based in Hudson Valley, that are based in the Capitol, that are based in Western New York, Niagara Falls, that are based in the Southern Tier, and small towns like Oneonta, New York, that folks don't know about, right? But that might have, TGNC and does have a TGNC population that does need to be served. And so, it offers that money is broken down through health and human services, the Department of Labor, which offers workforce development programs as TGNC folks are underemployed, which we know the governor actually constructed a report on this, and also the Office of Mental Health and Wellness to help support young New Yorkers that might struggle with suicide issues and suicide prevention measures. And so that's how the fund is broken down. And what we're actually calling for is an expansion of the fund, especially right now, given the federal hostility. And we're asking for that in order to address the growing concerns, obviously, of Black and Brown LGBTQ New Yorkers, and individuals, to ensure that like all trans New Yorkers can access the care and safety and wellness that they need, given what we were just talking about before, the executive orders. And so Lorena Borjas Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund is our way of making sure that equity is happening across New York State within the LGBTQ community, that folks are able to continue to receive the resources and services that they have, and that New York is able to remain, as it proclaims itself to be, a safe haven for TGNC people. And so it's very important that the 12th is expanded. It's very important that people continue to support it, and that we actually continue to support the organizations that are on the front line of receiving people who are either fleeing other states, moving around the city, looking to access care. The Lorena Borjas Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund provides for that. It provides for that in such a way that ensures that trans people, queer youth, non-binary folks are receiving their fair share.
So for yourself, give me the sense of your thoughts, your feelings since January the 20th. What's it been like for you?
Since January the 20th, unfortunately, I was not surprised. I think I continue to come back to that. I am not surprised at what we are experiencing. We lived through a Trump administration 1.0. It was actually very clear, both in the verbal statements of the incoming election, the preparation through Project 25, what could be expected if we were in the space that we are in right now. And so it has been indeed a lot more intense. I think than anybody imagined, not just myself, but I think many people did not imagine the onslaught to be this rapid and this aggressive on the front end. But in terms of myself and how I'm keeping myself, kind of grounded in the space, is being able to lean on the work and the practice, and knowing that yes, I live in New York, but New York is, not without its own like issues and causes. And it's important for us as the Pride Agenda in this current role, even as interim executive director, right? It's important for us to double down on protections. It's important for our governor and for our elected officials to stand beside us as champions as they have for the past few years, right? And not back down, but to really stand up and be on the side of LGBTQ New Yorkers, to understand the power and the presence, right? Not just of the work and the legacy of what does it mean for New York, the home of Stonewall, to stand strong, but the actual economic power that LGBTQ New Yorkers have, the actual voting power that LGBTQ New Yorkers have. And again, I go back to Proposition 1, where overwhelmingly all New Yorkers believe in the rights and protections of equity in our state. Right, so I'm really urging everybody, including myself, to really undertake the charge of making New York, New York. And what I mean by that is making sure that we stand our ground, making sure that we provide the safety that we need, that we remain a sanctuary state for LGBTQIA+ New Yorkers. And I'm doing that in my work with the Pride Agenda. I'm doing that in the work with my team. And even for myself, right? Like, I don't just name affirmations here for everybody else. As a transgender identifying individual living in New York, I reflect the same affirmations back to myself, right? I matter, you matter, I care about you, we care about you. And I also hold those affirmations for myself. Yes, it has been overwhelming, but I haven't lost the faith. I know that our community will continue to fight back. I know that our community is resilient. I know that we will survive this. And I want everybody to have that same sense of resilience and to understand that, yes, it is difficult right now, but I believe strongly in our democracy. And I believe that if we all have been kind of, singing, ringing those bells for the past, 2, 3, 4 years as to what is at stake, then we need to understand what is at stake here now is much bigger, right? Even though we are in the focal point as TGNC people, the attacks on our democracy are very serious. And as an American, as somebody who believes in this country and believes in democracy, those are the larger things that I think about. And those are the larger things that I'm actually willing to fight for.
And as the fight continues, tell us how people can join in on the fight.
New Pride Agenda is a statewide advocacy organization. Folks should visit our website. Folks should follow us on social media at New Pride Agenda. We have a lot of opportunities. Even our legislative agenda is set forth by the community. What do you want us to, take part in terms of policies that we follow? And so we are very deeply steeped in the democratic practices of what does it mean to be an active, civically engaged citizen of the state, of this city, of this country. So I would invite people to join New Pride Agenda or to get plugged in wherever you are. The chances are that if you are in New York State and you are working on an LGBTQ issue, New Pride Agenda is either present in that space or in partnership in that space. But I invite folks to know that we are here as a resource And we will continue to fight and advocate for the rights and protections of all New Yorkers, particularly LGBTQ identifying New Yorkers, those who live at the margins. We will continue to do that fight. And we hope that folks are willing to join us in that. We have to kind of, get off of our couches, get off of our social media platforms now, and really be ready to take up the fight. And that could be, activating an advocacy network. That could be supporting a food pantry or mutual aid network. There's a lot of ways in which we can really, fight back. And so we invite people to join us at New Pride Agenda in that fight, however you see fit. Trust and believe there's a role for you, for anybody who is really interested in advocating for the rights and safety of LGBTQ New Yorkers. And New Pride Agenda will be there to make sure that you know your place and that you can get to work.
Kei Williams, Interim Executive Director of the New Pride Agenda. Thank you so much for being with us.
Here.
All righty. Listen, we're taking a quick break. We'll be back with more right after this.